climate change. Climate change has stalled productivity growth in the continent's major staple, maize. With a combination of a growing population and a declining productivity, it is estimated that Africa's food imports could reach $110 billion per year by 2025. Putting this in perspective or in context, knowing that agriculture is the mainstay of most African economies, then we will appreciate the enormity of this challenge. But let me also mention here that there are huge opportunities too. Star 21 has not only presented risks, it has also presented solutions. Today, we'll hear from key players in building resilience in Africa's agriculture on the challenges, opportunities, and replicable solutions. I'm therefore pleased to introduce our very distinguished panelist and framing speaker today. So thank you so very much. We start, let me do a brief introduction. I know you have very rich CVs, and I won't be able to do justice to your CVs, but in the process of the discussion, I'm sure your expertise will come out. The way the seminar is framed, the webinar is framed today, we're going to have a framing speaker who is going to set in context what we are going to discuss today. Then we have very distinguished panelists who will then respond to what he has said. So our framing speaker today is Dr. Ademola Bremo. He's the coordinator, Climate Smart Agriculture at the World Bank. Dr. Bremo has expertise in agriculture, rural development, and so on. And he studied at the University of Bonn in Germany and Cambridge University in England. Prior to joining World Bank, he was a professor and did quite extensive work on climate smart agriculture and so on. He is, like we've said earlier, as a coordinator of the climate smart agriculture at the World Bank, he's helping countries to realize increased productivity, improved livelihoods, and enhanced resilience. The panelists, which I just introduced, go ahead and introduce. The second is Dr. Tilahun Amede, who is the head resilience, climate, and soil fertility at AGRA, the Africa Green Revolution Alliance. He has been working on integrated watershed management and as a resilience strategy to minimize risks and sustainably improve productivity of agricultural systems in East Africa. Dr. Amede has jointly developed a resilience strategy by introducing an innovation to convert disastrous floods to productive use using water spreading weirs to capture and spread the torrential floods emerging in the highlands into dry rangelands and crop fields. Our next panelist is Dr. Susan Carter, who is the lead partnerships Adaptation Research Alliance. Susan leads the climate services practice areas at South North. She currently leads on partnerships on the Adaptation Research Alliance. And prior to that, Susan headed the coordination unit for the Future Climate for Africa program and was head of country engagement for the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. Susan holds a PhD in climatology from the University of Cape Town. Then we also have with us a youth who happens to be the winner, one of the winners of the GCA AFDB Youth Challenge that drew up very extremely competent young men and women who had developed innovative solutions for climate change adaptation. And our next speaker, Mr. Muhammad Suleiman Elisha, who is the global, Mr. Muhammad Suleiman Elisha is one of them. He is a youth, like I've said, and has spent his young years in issues of agribusiness, where he's an expert and spent the last 5 years on that. And he's currently the founder, executive director, board chairman of Global Farmers and Trading Company. Next, we have Dr. Sonia Vermeulen, who is with the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research, CGIAR. So Sonia is a director of programs at the CGIAR system, leading on coordination of the delivery, performance, and results of the shared CGIAR research portfolio, plus assisting the One CGIAR executive management team. Sonia has previously served as Global Food Lead Scientist at WWF International and as Head of Research at the CGIAR. She has a PhD in Population Biology from Imperial College. And last but not the least is Dr. Caroline Wongera, who is with Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. Caroline is a scientist at the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, CIAT, specializing in farming systems and climate change. Her current focus is on promoting wide-scale adoption of climate-smart agricultural practices in East Africa, evaluating trade-offs and barriers. With over 10 years experience in African smallholder farming systems, her research interests are in understanding the complex dynamics of smallholder farmers and adaptation and mitigation strategies. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's a powerful panel that we have ahead of us. So I have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Brymer to kick us off. And in doing so, he is going to answer a few questions in the course of his presentation. We want to know basically what are the new issues and what does STAR 21 mean for food security in Africa. He co-authored the chapter on agriculture in this very interesting publication. So please, over to you, Dr. Brymer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. And good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you may be. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Well, this is the chapter that I'm talking about this morning, ably quoted by colleagues from the CGIAR, as well as the World Bank Group. Thanks very much to Sonia. She's also one of the panelists here that will be tackling some of the issues with us. You see, we cannot overemphasize the fact that food security needs urgent and serious attention in Africa. Currently, we have close to 300 million undernourished people, and this food security crisis are driven by a lot of issues, many of them related to climate change, drought, conflict, poverty, high food import prices, poor trade, environmental degradation, and climate migration, which is one of the most important issues that need serious and urgent attention in Africa currently. Food security declines by 5 to 20% in the continent with each flood or drought. And if we are not careful, by 2025, we'll be importing close to 110 billion to meet our food security needs in the continent. Under a 3 degrees Celsius scenario, the food system and issues will be catastrophic. Income will drop by as much as 8% for the bottom 40% Africans, while the absolute number of undernourished could climb up to 350 million people. And we talk so much about the 1.5 degrees Celsius. Well, that provides better options for addressing adaptation. But even then, we are still going to be facing a number of extreme events in the continent. Given all of these issues, we find that adapting Africa's food system to climate change is an imperative, not a choice. Well, the good news is that pathways for building food system resilience exist, and they are well defined, they are cost effective, and they build on evidence and experience. There are three major issues we need to take into consideration while building food system resilience in Africa. The first is public policy and incentive solutions, which some of my colleagues in the panel will be talking about. The second is food value chain and livelihood solutions. And the last is on-farm and productive landscape solutions. Again, the good news is that adapting the food system to climate change is cost effective, $15 billion per year, compared to a cost of inaction of about 201 billion. What do we want to choose? What are the cost effectiveness of the priorities? In the course of our report, we identified 5 major public sector investments that need to happen as quickly as possible. The first is water management at a cost of 6.1 billion. Look at the inaction cost, could be as much as 90.7 billion every year. The second is research and extension, creating robust research facilities, helping to better understand the impacts of climate extremes. Then the third one is land restoration. That is scaling up sustainable soil and water management practices to deliver climate benefits to our people across the continent. The last two concerns infrastructure and climate information services. We need to build transport routes to enable rural connectivity and farmers to better access markets. There's need for cold storage facilities to reduce post-harvest losses, food loss and waste, which is also an indication of our vulnerability to climate and weather extremes. Then the last one is climate information services. They need to develop early warning systems. They need to develop context-specific agronomic management advisories for farmers so that they can better adapt to climate change. Well, when we talk about what is happening currently, we see that there's a lot of momentum building towards adapting Africa's food systems to climate change. Just about 40 minutes ago, the AU launched the biennial report, the third CADIP biennial report. And one of the good news there is that we now have at least 15 African countries that are on track to meeting their climate adaptation goals in terms of a food system. But like I said in one of these slides, a lot still needs to be done. Now, in our own small way in the World Bank, beginning from November 2021, we started to release funding for building food system resilience programs in Africa. These programs are targeted at underlying structural challenges of food insecurity, addressing climate vulnerability, as well as building resilience and building the risk management capacity of our countries. Then another feature of the programs is that they provide a flexible menu, depending on country contexts, of short-term responses to a rapidly deteriorating food security solution, as well as long-term transformation solutions to resilience. These are the countries covered, about 16 initially, with the hope that we expand more to more countries in the next few months. What are the things we're talking about there? Building resilience to productive capacity, again, through research and development, expanding digital agriculture and climate information services, managing natural resources sustainably, enhancing market access, as well as commercialization, and also improving policy and regional coordination. So we hope that with all of these issues taken together, we'll have a better opportunity to help the continent address the climate vulnerability and resilience issues as they concern the food systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brimo. That was quite rich and quite informative. It shows that the cost of action might look huge, but the cost of inaction is really mind-boggling. So I, with that, really don't have any excuse but to ensure that adaptation in agriculture, it's the way to go. And one other thing I saw from that report, basically, is that the positive cost benefits, in every of these early interventions are just huge. So why are we not jumping on this? Why is the private sector not jumping on this? Could it be that the policies are not there to support this? So I have the pleasure of calling on Dr. Vermeulen to please share with us what are some of those policy incentive solutions that we can apply to ensure that we build resilience into Africa's agriculture. Please let me request us to just limit our interventions to 3 minutes each so we can have time for interactive discussions. Many questions are already coming in. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony, and hi, everybody. So great to see so many people on the call today. And I've actually had the pleasure and privilege this week to be with Dr. Yuba Sakona, the Vice President of IPCC. And we asked him, what has been the reception in the middle of the Ukraine war? What has been the reception to this incredibly important IPCC report that's just come out? And he said, actually, there's been lots of attention, but what has struck him is that most of the attention, again, has been on the impacts and not on the most important messages of the report, which are around the solutions. And so when Ademola and I and the other colleagues were working together on this paper, that's what we really tried to focus on. And as Ademola pointed out, we kind of identified these 5 major areas where public investment was needed, because as you say, the private sector does need incentives, and there are areas where it really needs to be kick-started by public investment for 2 reasons. One is the scale of the problem, and then the other is public sector finance is much more just better distributed and able to bring up the welfare of less privileged people, particularly rural farmers, women and others. So I'd just like to kind of touch on 2 of them that Ademola pointed out. Out of our 5, 2 really fall in that kind of policy incentive space. And so one is around these set of real-time information systems. So early warning systems, climate forecasts, and not just for Met services, not just for big farmers, but really getting that information into the hands of, for example, small-scale farmers at planting time. When is the rainy season going to start? That's the kind of information that can save people huge amounts of money in terms of inputs if they know when to plant. So those kind of real-time information solutions, I think, are a huge part. They can really enable private investment. And when I say private investment, I mean also by the very smallest of farmers to get their investments right. And just to say, African countries have had already really big success stories here. We're not advocating for something that's never been tried. We're advocating for something where countries like Rwanda, Senegal, Angola, already reaching millions of farmers, it's cost effective, it's in local languages, and so on. The other area I want to talk about there is around research. And of course, it sounds classic. I'm a researcher, I'm advocating more investment in research. But it really does make a difference. We're moving into a state of the world now where changes that might have taken 100 years, this is now going to happen in 10 years. So to use an example from my home country, Zimbabwe, we may see in the next 10 to 20 years maize harvests failing more often than they succeed. The kind of cultural shift that you need in terms of what people eat, the move away from traditional diets, the change in kind of agricultural value chains, where are the processing plants, I mean, it's immense. And you can see that just some inputs into the agricultural research to kind of envision and plan for these futures is critical. At the moment in Africa, our data, we showed that, in 33 out of 40 countries where we had data, that they're putting back less than 1% of agriculture GDP back into the research systems. Just plowing back in some of that investment would really put people onto much stronger futures. I will stop there, but before I go, just to flag a few things. There are just a few things where it doesn't necessarily cost a lot in money, but there will be political costs. Things like keeping trade barriers down when there are food crises, critical one. Similarly, things like the kind of bigger picture of what you can do. So here, gender equality really stands out to me. Improving women's access to resources and land rights is going to put everybody on a more resilient footing. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Sene. You've really touched on some critical areas. Let me just pick one on digital solutions, for instance. Last year, November, I was in Nairobi, and I know they were expecting rain that never came, and the farmers basically sat helpless. And we're thinking, how can we integrate digital climate advisory services and technologies into Africa's agriculture? Maybe that could help put us on fire. But then, like you've said, in all this, the women smallholders are still very far behind, even where this have been done. So the young farmers, we say that the youth basically are the younger ones are the ones driving this agenda now. They are so techy, and it's something we need to encourage. So talking about that, I have one of our speakers here, Mr. Mahama. He happens to have won one of our Youth Challenge Awards at the Global Center on Adaptation, where we looked at, we advertised for a challenge and we received over 2,000 wonderful, solid, innovative projects, that would contribute to addressing issues of adaptation and resilience, and for which the winners of that, we selected 15 at COP26. We take them through incubation period, to training, hand-holding, business and entrepreneurship, until we can take them over the valley of death and then expose them to bigger finance. So, Mahama, you won that. Could you tell us very briefly, you have just 3 minutes, what that project is about and what you think young people like you can benefit, or what should be done so that young people like you can benefit and go more into agriculture? Most people are leaving agriculture to the old people. The young men have gone to town. You are staying back in. What do you need? And please, while you're on that, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A, please. It's going to be as interactive as possible. Thanks. Mahama?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm most grateful for the opportunity, and then good afternoon, good evening to my colleague panelists. It's been great having you people in this conference or webinar. I am most grateful. In fact, agriculture and rural livelihoods, resources management, and food insecurity have some positive correlation when it comes to in the context of development and then climate change adaptation and resilience among smallholder farmers. And so it's been nice, and the Youth Adapt has so far given us certain direction in terms of enhancing ecosystem services and then climate mitigation strategies. We are doing our best with smallholder farmers, trying to instill into them the need to practice conservation agriculture services and the need to increase production and also to enhance quality production of grains and other foodstuffs. So in all parts in this country, we are doing our best to ensure that we fully realize climate adaptation and resilience among smallholder farmers and the global community as well. So as a young person, we have been doing in the technological aspects, we are leading charge in trying to connect communities, also promoting well-being of vulnerable people and women. We are trying our best to at least improve on people livelihood, especially the rural communities. And so we are doing our best in that regard. And when it comes to government policies, we are also much focused on the government granting us certain incentives in terms of tax holidays, also trying to maybe subsidize certain inputs when it comes to the agriculture sector, and then providing a lot of financial support for the youth, because that's what the youth needs as we speak. Because we have the ideas, but how to develop the ideas when it comes, most of the ideas are very capital intensive. So we need funding sources like the Youth Adapt, what they provided and went through competition process and were able to secure funding for, and then training for our company. And so most of the youth nowadays needs those supports. They need certain incentive. Government needs to create a set enabling environment for the youth to strive, because we have the idea, we have basically the youth are creative, we are innovative in so many areas. And if you look at the technology aspect in today, the youth are good in promoting certain vulnerable, like in terms of the well-being of women, in terms of the health aspects, in terms of climate mitigation strategies. We are doing a lot when it comes to technology. People are doing recycling. Youths are having ideas that has to do recycling of e-waste. People are trying to do a lot, link farmers to the world in terms of digital payment systems, in terms of forecast when it comes to inputs and other stuff. And so we are most grateful, and I think we, the youth of Africa and the world at large, we need those set opportunities to enable us enhance ecosystem services and probably climate adaptation and resilience. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so very much, Mahama. You've again also pointed out a couple of things. The youth are doing great things that they need to be encouraged, they need to be supported, and so on, because we believe that they hold the future of making sure that the world is fed and fed sustainably. Just like Sonia said, there are certain innovations, maybe changing our diet, and so on. I think it's the youth that can run into that space. Next, I have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Wangera, Caroline. Africa is full of pilots, pilot projects, pilot adaptation, pilot resilience, pilots everywhere. We need to bring these pilot projects into mainstream development. So could you share with us some of the livelihood enhancing solutions that you've seen in the agricultural value chain, what the prospects are for replicability and scalability of these successes that you may have known, so that what has been successful in Zambia can be transferred to Nigeria, what is successful in Nigeria can be transferred to Sudan if things are right. How do we move from this mentality of pilots? Caroline, over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think I'm going to share an example of a project that I am leading in Senegal, in the southwest of Senegal, which particularly is addressing climate adaptation challenge and looking at how do we promote sustainable and innovative intensification of smallholder and climate change adapted crops. So this project is targeting 10,000 smallholder farmers. And in particular, we want that 70% of our beneficiaries are women and young people. And so one of the issues we are trying to address is how do we link market actors in the space of irrigation to smallholder women and youth. And what we have seen in terms of how we are scaling, how a solution to scale has been catapulted by the growth of mobile phone access. And we have seen that young people and women in particular have access to, for instance, SMS services. And therefore, we have used that as a solution to strengthen the distribution chain of irrigation technologies and agricultural inputs through involving various actors. So this is based on, first we went in and did a market research to understand what's a market system operating in the region, because it's a very remote area of the country, and also tailoring solutions to address the gap of access for women and youth to smallholder irrigation services, technology, and capacity. So one of the things that we are doing is that we have created an SMS-based platform where we are delivering a smart incentive, which is a short-term intervention that we are delivering. And that is from the financial aspect, we are using an e-voucher system, so in the platform, so that we are able to make sure that there's a linkage between the supply and demand. Because as you see, there's, of course, the SME is there, the private sector is there in the irrigation space, but what is the solution of scaling those solutions is the challenge is that you do not find access to by smallholder women in particular, because they don't have the financing that is required initially to be able to access those technologies. So using that e-voucher system, which is SMS-based, we're also building that to provide a link between where is the supply of irrigation services, after we have done the research to also identify what SMEs can particularly work for women and young people in the context, in particular looking at the challenges such as communication and also location. Are they easily accessible to our clients that are the clients that we are focusing on? And also, how do we use that platform to broker those commercial partnerships and contracts so that we're able to make sure that the services being provided are affordable to the smallholder farmers, but also to be able to bring other players who are, for instance, the off-takers, the input providers and financial service providers, so that this is provided at a low transaction cost. So what we are now seeing is that this is scalable because we are leveraging on the access of mobile phone solutions. And also we are using a communication platform that also leverages on, for instance, the local language to be able to relay information of these are the services available, this is where you can obtain the services, and this is the cost of those services. The challenges still remain in terms of scaling, because we still see there's a gap in terms of the technical capacity and readiness of the value chain actors. And so we need to really build that capacity and also build in a lot of training. And also we are seeing that one of the things that's also there that's required is transparency, because people want to have transparent information. For instance, what's the cost of the service that I'm procuring? What is the quality of that service? So that's what we want to utilize, and that has been a very successful case that we are scaling, and we have seen that this is also helping us to be able to link the women and young people, especially with means of accessing fields that have irrigation services. Because as we started the project 2 years ago, on average, every woman had 20 square meters of land that had access to irrigation services, which is very small to have competitive production as well as volumes that can be linked to off-takers and for the markets. So that's what we are solving for, and we're seeing that is going to help us to address that challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's music to my ears, because most people have always said the problem we have with Africa's agriculture is that smallholders, very small farms, you can't aggregate, you can't do this, you can't do that. So if you can address that problem, we've seen other projects where they do geocoding, digitize these farms, and everyone knows where it is, but collectively they become a large farm that they bring in shared services, and it makes things work for them. I also like the fact that you're working a lot on digital services. I've always said, look, mobile money did not start elsewhere. It started in Africa. It started in Kenya. Young people got together and leapfrogged. at a point when it was a measure, an indicator of human development, to have how many telephone lines per certain number of population. Kenya jumped the landlines, jumped all that, and went straight into transforming the use of mobile phones. And I think that's the sort of revolution we want to see in the agriculture space. We want to see more of that being driven, and so kudos to what you're doing. Dr. Carter, now over to you, Suzanne. You've worked extensively with development partners, organizations, and you're a very vital part of Africa's development. What do you think that development partners like you can do to promote resilience and help smallholder farmers, to adapt to climate change? What can partners like you do?
Thanks so much, and good afternoon from Cape Town. I think that the design of development programs is really where the key intervention is needed, because this can greatly affect the way that interventions for resilience are taken up. When I've headed up the coordination unit for the Future Climate for Africa program, for example, which is funded through UK Aid, FCDO and NERC, they adopted a co-production approach from the outset for all of their pilot projects. And that co-production approach is maybe something that not everyone is aware of, but basically it's the idea that you bring research and practice together, and that you bring the various actors who are involved into the same room, and that you jointly decide what the priority should be. And this is something that development partners didn't used to like very much, because you don't know exactly what you're going to get out if you are bringing people together to jointly determine what the outcome will be. So, what exactly you'll get out of the end of the process is sort of emergent and difficult sometimes to predict. But there's this leap of faith that you sort of take that you will get something better because you've involved all the right people in the process. And I think the FCFA program was really lucky in that it managed to showcase how this kind of activity can really, really leverage the right kinds of interventions. For example, one of the agricultural examples, because it covered multiple different sectors, but the High Crystal project worked with smallholder farmers to produce these short videos with farmers themselves being the ones that decided what those videos would be about. They were trained in how to use the filming equipment, and they got some mentoring, but it was driven by their own ideas and needs about what they thought the problems were in their context. And those videos weren't predetermined, but sort of emerged from the process. And what came out of it was sort of short videos about best practices that other farmers could use, but also advocating more widely for what are the problems facing our sector, what are the things we're struggling with, what we don't know how to deal with, and that we need help with. And they actually used those videos to advocate with the regional government to find better use for extension services, better ways to support them. And those are the kinds of things that are, because they're driven by the people who are really affected, they have the most resonance, and people really feel that they can do something more about these, because it's really driven by the roots of the problem and not by what a researcher might think is an interesting idea or a government official might think is an interesting idea, but by the people on the ground. And I think this is the approach that we really need to be driving more collectively, is that it's okay to not know exactly where we're going to, but we need to involve the right people, and the right people are the people who are vulnerable, the people who are dealing with these challenges on the ground. So I'm not going to go into too much detail because I know we're short on time, but if anyone's interested in these things, please do look up the Future Climate for Africa website. There's lots of other examples. But I think one of the things that we did in our evaluation towards the end of the program, because we're sort of wrapping up now, is we did some check-ins with the decision makers about whether they felt that the program had been useful to them. And we were blown away by 100% of respondents saying that they felt that it had an improved appreciation for both climate information and the risks that needed to be made in decision making. And I think it really speaks to this, bringing people into the process. If they are part of the process, they're much more likely to benefit from it and much more likely to understand what the usefulness of these things is. On the other side of the equation, we had an interview with 12 different partner researchers from one of the projects. And out of the 12, 11 of those researchers felt that their capacity to deliver climate information for decision-making had been improved during the program. Because it's not just working on the one side. The researchers also need to build their capacity to understand what's going on the ground. And so it's the idea of bringing these people all together is really, I think, the thing that I'm trying to sort of get more people to be excited about, because I see it as a vital bridge to build this, divide between these divides between science and practice, and to really increase the trust and knowledge sharing that can happen between those communities, improve the capacity of decision makers to appreciate and use climate information, as well as the capacity of the researchers to produce the right things that are actually needed. So the program's winding down now, but I hope it's given you a flavor of what we have managed to achieve so far. We're still hoping that some of the results will be seen in the future, because these things sometimes take time to bed down. But I think it's really already shown us that taking that leap of faith to co-produce research that decision makers can use is really worth it. I hope that helps put the conversation ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Susan. At least you've shown what many people have believed for so long, that capacity building is not done in a 3-day workshop in a fancy hotel somewhere. You work with the people, you spend time with them, and get them to work with those tools, and you work, so that to me is what I think is we need as a continent right now. If you go to most places, and then after a 3-day workshop, you drop them a software model that can manage water resources, and tell them to apply it to their national water resource program. I doubt if they will be able to do it after a 3-day workshop and so on. So working with them, building that hand-holding is basically what we believe should be for the communities and for the intermediates guys, even the policymakers. So thank you very much for that. Dr. Mede, climate change in Africa is about water. It rains too much, we flood.
Yes.
And we lose. It doesn't rain, drought, and we starve. Can you share some of those good water management practices that you believe have worked, that our farmers can adopt going forward?
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon. I think you started it well. I have colleagues who are saying climate change is about water, so it's water-centric. It's either too much water or too little water in the system. And if you see really what's happening globally, there is an increased incidence of drought. Colleagues estimated that in the last 2 decades, the fresh water available per person declined by about 20%, which means really a 10% decline per decade, which is very, very shocking. And one of the facts, reasons people claim is irrigated agriculture, which accounts for about 70% of the global water withdrawal globally. And the estimation by the State of Food and Agriculture report says that about 40% of that water is mismanaged, unsustainably managed. On the other hand, in the African continent, about 85% of the production is still rain-fed, except very few countries in North Africa, we are still relying on rain. So, and most of the negative effect is really reflected both on crop, but also on pastoral and agro-pastoral systems. So we are saying, climate change adaptation could not be achieved without efficient and optimized use of water. If you see the IPCC report of 2022, they have identified that, in fact, there is an increasing incidence of drought. And if you really unpack where it's happening hugely, about 65% of the problems of Africa are related to water shortages. So what are the solutions? I think being, a rain-fed agricultural system, the first solution is about what we call rainwater management. It's about integrated strategy for unlocking the potential of rain-fed systems by systematically mapping, by capturing where the water is, by storing it, and by efficiently utilizing it, both the green water, but also the surface and underground water. And what's required is really, one, minimizing unproductive water loss. we lose water everywhere in this continent. But also wherever we use water, it's also used non-efficiently. So improving water productivity, which means increasing the return per unit of water, invested. But also, we have many other externalities that are affecting water. Land degradation is one, vegetation management, watersheds. So unless you really manage the bigger system, by managing water at a farm, you cannot change and modify and improve and make a system resilient. In fact, this year, in the last 1 year, in East Africa, we lost about 1 million livestock, mainly because of droughts. And that is a huge loss. And I think the first speaker thought about, cost of inaction, which with water is about at least 15 times more. So we'd have saved 1 million livestock if we have invested, for example, on watering points. I used to work for the CGR system, for ICRISAT, and we estimated that by reducing the distance that livestock is moving from about 12 kilometers to 3 kilometers in search for drinking water, it's possible to increase the milk yield by about 400 liters per cow per lactation period, and at the same time and the same amount of feed. So in AGRA, what I'm really trying to do is bringing, the capacity for people to identify and understand the systems and manage the water in the farms, in the landscapes, and the bigger farming systems. So the rainwater management is one core area. The second core area I would like to emphasize is really there are investments in the continent by big players, including the World Bank, IFAD, on irrigation systems. And most of these systems are inefficient. So investing on water productivity, good agronomy, market linkages of the schemes so that people will have the incentives to manage them better is a very, very important investment. But also, the available irrigation with increasing climate change is not enough. While elsewhere the investment is huge, in Africa, we still need irrigation schemes. We need a lot of public investment, which of course can be implied as rehabilitating the existing ones, modernizing the new ones, but making sure that we produce more per unit area. And we need at least a doubling to sustain livelihoods in the continent, including the livestock system. And that requires, of course, incentives, because water management is a very knowledge incentive, a resource incentive, intensive process. So we need to link water management with market incentives. People should produce high value crops and link it to markets and have the access to good extension, but also, capacities agro-dealers, but also policy incentives, making sure that the institutions are functioning, are favored in terms of at least capacity building and linkages, but also incentives like water pricing, making sure that we improve the productivity and the use of water, saving water, and also mobilizing our communities, to set rules, the regulations that would improve water productivity, so that everybody is not consuming only, but also saving and transferring water to other uses, and making sure that there is a business model that is reflecting the continent, because African continent is not one. We have about 13 distinct farming systems, and each farming system will need a very distinct business model in terms of climate change adaptation with the management. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so very much, distinguished panelists. There's quite some interesting questions in the chat box. I'll just give you 1 minute to answer them. Bremer, there's a question on, under a climate finance constrained world, what incentives can drive more public spending to address the 5 components you talked about? What sort of financing facilities are there? 1 minute. I know it's just going to be an appetizer. And then Caroline, there are questions on, should we continue to remain smallholder farmers, or should we try to transform African farmers to commercial farmers? What's your take on it? And so on. And then there's a question on, beyond addressing climate change, there are other structural issues that we need to address to deal with climate change, resilient climate change in terms of enabling environment, ownership of land for gender equality and all that. How do you see that playing out on the continent? Is there any improvement? So Sonia, I'll let you take that. In any other 3 questions. Brahma?
Okay, yeah, thanks very much. In terms of improving public spending, the amount is important. The quality also is important. There are some expenditure that we need to repurpose, especially in the context of Africa, to more climate smart forms. For instance, most of the input subsidies are perverse. Now, we need to restructure this to more climate smart pathways to make sure that we are using them to stimulate adaptation actions. For instance, we talked about research, for instance. We've talked about water, irrigation, and all of these other things. So look at the public good aspects of the financing and make sure that we focus our investments in those areas. Now, climate finance is very small, but the starting point actually is for the countries themselves to have their national programs and start off. Once you develop your own financing, just like CADIP, one of the CADIP commitment is to enhance agricultural investment. So it is important to make sure that you do this, and other financing will come from outside. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Caroline, are we shooting ourselves in the foot remaining smallholders?
I think the question was whether we need to transition our farmers to commercial. I think we have challenges that, if we are realistic, we can say we cannot be able to transition 70 to 80% of our farmers who are smallholder to commercial. But what can we do? We can be able to make sure that we have our smallholders operating profitable and competitive value chains. So I think the areas we need to address is around how do we be able to even scale and sustain solutions in those value chains. So I would say that one of the issues that we need to look at, we know 80% of the food in Africa is sourced through a private sector. 64% is through SMEs. Why don't we have smallholder farmers being the critical players in that area of SMEs? Because this is where value is, and this is where profitability is going to be. So I think competitiveness and profitability is something we can enhance in those value chains.
Thank you very much. Caroline, the last word. Enabling environments, secure land titles, gender equality. How are we faring? Enabling environment policies.
So the about enabling environment.
That was Sonia, sorry.
Oh, you're turning to me. Okay, thanks very much. And this was a question in the chat about the balance between the fundamentals versus specific adaptation interventions. My gut feeling is get the fundamentals right, but we know that we've been struggling with that for decades. And there has been interesting research actually that's looked at this. And their findings is actually kind of half-half. Put work into the fundamentals, but there are these kind of smaller scale investments that really can, make a difference. The insurance pieces, the digital services, and so on. You also ask, how joined up is Africa? And actually, interestingly, I would say compared to other continents, Africa's more joined up when it comes to climate adaptation. It's agricultural development and adaptation kind of go hand in hand. But in countries where the mitigation problem is more the focus, there's a lot more tension.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I am unable to summarize all what you've said, but it's been quite interesting. and we've run out of time. I really like us to keep to these times. And let me thank you all for sparing the time to engage in this, and particularly also thank the UK government as COP26 president in making this available. In supporting and paying, in supporting and sponsoring this program today. So thank you so very much, and thanks for all who've contributed to organizing this from GCA. And I hope to see you again at the next dialogue. Thank you. Bye, everyone.